Hello, everyone. We're going to wait just a moment or two to get everybody in the meeting, and then we will begin. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you all taking the time to be with us today to learn a little bit more about the census. In my own life, when the election was over, my personal friends and even my boss, I'm not talking about Tim Story, it's my other boss at NCSL, said to me, boy, you must be relieved because the election is over and now things are going to settle down. That must feel great. Well, you all on this call are my group of folks who understand why the election didn't mean a chance to settle down and relax. There's more stuff coming, and it's the census followed right by redistricting. So I feel like I'm amongst friends who only got to take a quick weekend breath and then onward to new things. So we are fortunate today to have James Whitehorne from the Census Bureau. He comes to us frequently, and I want to say he needs no introduction, but the introduction I'll offer is that I consider him a friend and almost a part. He's adjacent. He's to our program. I feel as though he's almost one of us. And then we have Karin McDonald from California, who runs the statewide database. And she also has been with NCSL through many years, possibly many decades. I'm not quite sure. She and I go back for 10 years. So we've got real expertise on the call. And I know many of you have expertise too. And probably some of you have questions. If that's the case, then go ahead and put them in the chat box down at the bottom. We will answer those, maybe one or two after James talks, but mostly we're going to save them for the end. Two more details. We do have a hard stop at 1 hour from now. That's 1 o'clock Mountain Time. And I do believe that there are reporters on the call. So just know that that's happening and that we are recording this and we will make it available to NCSL folks after the fact as well. James, did I forget to say anything I should say? And are you set to go?
I'm set to go whenever you're ready.
All right.
Let me go ahead.
Do it. Thank you.
All right. Give me 1 second here so I can share my screen. All right. So you made me laugh a little bit there, Wendy, because I sometimes feel the same sort of the feeling as the census is conducted, and when the collection operations come to a close, there's a collective sigh of relief from the people who have to deal with the field operations, and then those of us who deal with post-processing and data dissemination and those types of things are sort of waving a little bit, saying, you know, wait, we're not done, we're not done. But that's sort of just an internal thing from the last couple of years. But I want to thank both you and Christy for again giving us this venue that we can keep your members informed of the current activities of the Census Bureau, but especially for those activities that are involved around redistricting and voting rights data products. I'm going to go through an assortment of topics today. Some are new and some are ones that I've touched on before, but I wanted to kind of bring everyone up to date on what we're going to talk about. And of course, I do try to start with whatever the sort of elephant in the room at the time we're doing these presentations is. And I know that one of the highest profile census issues right now is regarding congressional apportionment. Unfortunately, there is not a lot that I can say beyond what you've likely already heard. The Census Bureau is committed to delivering the apportionment counts as close to our statutory deadline as possible. And we're working to ensure the quality of the data behind the apportionment counts and taking the time necessary to fix any problems that have come up. Many people are concerned because they've heard in the news that the time frame for creating those counts has been compressed. We are able to do this work in an expedited manner by making adjustments to how this work is performed. And just a couple of the things that we've been able to do. One is we were able to eliminate a secondary check of our master address file. We have consistently tested the master address file leading up to and through the census. We have had modified how we update the master address file to do an in-office address canvassing, which involves some testing. So there was enough testing that had been done to the master address file. This secondary check didn't seem that it was necessary. We also have faster computing power that we're using 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. We have staff working 7 days a week on these issues. And we also changed our approach so that we're focusing solely on apportionment, and we've deferred some of the redistricting processes. So typically when we're preparing the data for calculating apportionment, there are other activities that we do that are required of the processing that are needed for the purposes of generating their later redistricting data. But they aren't required for producing just the state level counts that we need for creating apportionment numbers. And so what we've done is we've sort of decoupled those, and I'll mention this later in the presentation as well. We've decoupled those activities and deferred the ones that are specifically just for redistricting to later, to lessen the amount of activities that needed to be conducted to get us to the apportionment counts. So while that work is going on, I wanted to point out that the Census Bureau is still very busy and has a lot of other data being produced to help the American public. On the economic side of the Census Bureau, we're publishing the business size tables. These tables provide establishment and firm size data at the national level from the 2017 economic census. They present data on numbers of establishments, employment, annual payroll, sales broken out by employment and sales size of the establishment or firm. And that data was actually published today. We have the Service Annual Survey, or SAS table package. This provides statistics on revenue, payroll, sources of revenue, expenses, exports, inventory, revenue from electronic sources, and then other selected industry-specific data for the service industries. And this data set will be published next Friday. Another data set that's likely of interest to NCSL members is we're publishing the quarterly summary of state and local government tax revenues on December 17th. This data set provides quarterly estimates of state and local government tax revenue at a national level, as well as detailed tax revenue data for individual states. We have a new product coming out, also tentatively being published on December 17th, known as the Non-Employer Statistics by Demographics, or NESD. This new product uses exclusively existing administrative records and census data to provide demographic characteristics for non-employer businesses by geography, industry, receipt size class, and legal form of organization. And then finally, we have one that we're quite proud of, which is the Small Business Pulse Survey. This is one of the 2 pulse surveys that we're doing, which collects near real-time data on the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on small businesses. This has been published weekly and is currently expected to continue at least until mid-January of next year. Phase 3 of that product. It will continue until mid-January of next year. On the demographic side of the Census Bureau, we have several data products coming out this month as well. One that came out yesterday was the America's Families and Living Arrangements Table Package, which provides new estimates on the changing trends in the number of parents with children under age 18 living with them. The release also highlights the similarities and differences in living arrangements among fathers and mothers. Today, the Bureau published the International POP estimates. These are population estimates and projections for 228 countries and areas that extend out through the year 2100. The international database consists of estimates and projections of demographic indicators, including population size and growth by sex and single year of age up to 100 and over, and components of change, mortality, fertility, and net migration. Another very critical data set that's coming out next week, and one that's important in the world of redistricting and voting rights, is the latest 5-year estimates from the American Community Survey. The survey covers more than 40 social, economic, housing, and demographic topics, such as homeownership rates and costs, health insurance, and educational attainment. This data set is the source data that will be used for the ACS, or American Community Survey-based citizen voting age population by race and ethnicity that will be published early next year. It is also the core data set that's used for the next round of the Section 203 language determinations under the Voting Rights Act, which are expected to be published in December of 2021. Something that I know a few of you out there, and I see a few of you on the cameras that I know are looking forward to this, is the total and voting age population estimates that come out towards the end of the month. These are estimates of the total population and voting age population for the nation, states, and the District of Columbia, and they're based on the 2010 census and were created without incorporation or consideration of the 2020 census results. This is the data set that's often used by experts to predict apportionment counts. And then finally, and one of the reasons I wanted to run through these product releases is the upcoming release of the 2020 demographic analysis estimates on December 15th. And I'm going to talk about those a little more later in the presentation. So if you called into my last NCSL update I gave, you'd be familiar with this slide and the next one after it. I'm not going to walk through them again, but I do want to reiterate a few points about data quality and data quality measures. So we are still early in our analysis, but some operational indicators are suggesting that the data quality for the 2020 census is comparable to that of the 2010 census. It's a good sign that our completion rates were similar to those in 2010. Overall, we accounted for 99.98% of addresses nationwide by the end of our data collection, and more households responded on their own. And that's very important because we believe self-response generally yields the most complete and accurate information. When households didn't respond, we were able to use high-quality existing records, information that people have already given to the federal government. This decade, we implemented a new feature for the 2020 census design that allowed us to use those high-quality administrative records when they were available to count people who didn't self-respond to the census or to fill in missing information if they left some information out. These records included the Internal Revenue Service records, Medicare records, and Social Security Administration information, as well as the 2010 census data. If a household didn't respond after one or more census taker visits, we checked to see if these data sources could provide information for that address. We used these existing data sources only if we were confident in their quality and accuracy for that household. Otherwise, we continued to visit the household and, if necessary, try to get information about the address from a neighbor or other knowledgeable proxy respondent. We had about the same percent of proxy respondents the last decade. If a census taker couldn't get a response directly from a household member after 3 visits, they tried to get that information about the address from a knowledgeable proxy respondent, such as a neighbor, a landlord, or a building manager. And then, of course, for vacant addresses, we have to use a proxy response because no one lives at those addresses. Proxy responses are subject to the same quality checks as other interviews. We check proxy responses against administrative records, and we re-interviewed households when responses appeared to be anomalies. In addition to these early indicators, there are 2 primary methods for evaluating the quality of the census. The post-enumeration survey is a short survey run after each census to determine how many people were missed or counted more than once. It's run independently from the census to provide an independent assessment of the completeness of the census. From that survey, it's possible to determine the number of people who were counted in the census and the number of people who should have been counted in that census. This is how we would determine the difference in what is referred to as the net undercount or net overcount. These undercount results are a highly anticipated measure of the census's quality and are expected at the end of 2021, traveling through the beginning of 2020.
James, we don't hear you. Are you on mute?
It did mute me. Did you've heard me up to now, right?
You need to back up probably a full slide or at least a minute.
Let's see. So to this slide or before? Did I talk about administrative records? Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay. And then did you hear about post-enumeration survey?
No, let's start there.
Okay. So in addition to the indicators that I talked about before, there's 2 primary methods for evaluating the quality of the census. The post-enumeration survey is a short survey run after each census to determine how many people were missed or counted more than once. It's run independently from the census to provide an independent assessment of the completeness of the census. From that survey, it's possible to determine the number of people who were counted in the census and the number of people who should have been counted. This is how we're able to determine the difference between what is referred to as the net undercount. Those undercount results are a highly anticipated measure of the quality of the census and are expected around the end of 2021, going through early 2022. Then the second measure that I want to highlight a little more is the demographic analysis estimates. As I mentioned earlier, these are expected to be published on the 15th of December. Demographic analysis is a technique used to develop an understanding of the age, sex, and racial composition of a population, how it's changed over time through the basic demographic processes of births, deaths, and migrations. Since our nation has a robust vital registration system that records both births and deaths in the population, however, some things are not recorded as well as others in current or historical records. For example, race and ethnicity information is not always measured in the same way in birth records and other records historically as it is in the census. This makes it difficult to estimate the size of some racial and ethnic groups. As a result, we're only able to produce the demographic analysis estimates for national level estimates of the population by age, sex, some races, and Hispanic origin. This December's demographic analysis will be for the population with a reference date of April 1st, 2020, which, as you notice, is the same as Census Day. These estimates are developed from historical vital statistics, estimates of international migration, and Medicare records. They're independent from the 2020 census, and they can be used to calculate net coverage error, which is one of the two main ways the Census Bureau traditionally measures coverage of the census. The Deputy Director of the Census Bureau, Ron Jarman, and the Associate Director for Demographic Programs, Tori Velkoff, along with several other Census Bureau experts, will be doing a news conference on this on the day of their release. And I have that information on this slide deck, and the slides I've shared with Wendy and Christy so that they could share them with the attendees after the session is over. Also, in 2022, we plan to produce an experimental set of 2020 demographic analysis estimates for young children aged 0 to 4 at the state and county levels. These estimates will incorporate current birth records, which just don't happen to be available yet from your local jurisdictions. Some examples of the types of tables that are produced for the demographic analysis from the 2010 census, or from the last decennial census, were the total U.S. resident population by age, the Black U.S. resident population by age, non-Black U.S. resident population by age, total population by age and sex, then the Hispanic U.S. resident population by age and non-Hispanic, and then there were others. I also included the link here, so if people want to go and look and poke around with those tables, when they get the slide deck, they can jump right there and take a look. As an example of what you can find in those reports, this is the table for the total U.S. population by age. It illustrates the low, middle, the low, the low, middle, the high, middle, and the high estimate for single years of age. And although the table I have in my slide is truncated just for purposes of fitting on the screen, in reality, this goes up to the age of 85 plus. In addition to the post-enumeration survey and the demographic analysis, we also assess the quality of the census by evaluating how well census operations were conducted. By looking at how the census was conducted, we can get a sense of the quality of the results. In the coming months, the Bureau will conduct extensive evaluations of 2020 census operations and will make these available to the public, as we've done each decade. Some of these evaluations are an analysis of how well the mobile devices work for the census takers, what percentage of households refuse to participate in an interview with their census takers, so the refusal rate, and then that's how we'll also work towards our final proxy rate. We'll have additional information about responses by different response modes, by demographic groups, by language, once we're able to get that information available. Additional operational metrics related to data quality when we release data related to the apportionment counts. We've also invited an independent group of scientists that are called the JASON to review our plans, processes, procedures, and proposed metrics around 2020 census data quality and what will be what they call a winter study, meaning the time frame of the year when it will be conducted. We also plan to work with the ASA and the National Academies of Sciences to continue our assessment of data quality. So I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about our disclosure avoidance plans. All of the 2020 census data products, with the exception of apportionment, will have disclosure avoidance techniques applied. We've done this for at least the last several decades. The difference this decade is that we're moving away from our old techniques to something called formal privacy or differential privacy, which injects noise into the data to protect respondents while still maintaining the data as fit for use by our data users. So yes, as I said in my last presentation on this, this does mean that the redistricting data will have differential privacy applied. We're continually updating information about our efforts on differential privacy and have a specific web page dedicated to providing that information, which is provided in the last link of this bullet as well. So we'll get that in the slide deck if you want to check that out. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these entries today because I've walked through them in previous updates that we've done together. But what I'm going to point out today is that the latest materials we're providing to illustrate our progress, as well as point out a report that I had previously not mentioned. So for those who may not have heard this last time, for a brief background, we've been producing demonstration data products using the 2010 census data as its source. These data products are made available publicly periodically so data users can apply their use cases to them to see how the outcomes would have been affected by our use of differential privacy. We released the initial run as a full demonstration data product back in October of 2019. We followed that with what we call a PPMF, which looks like individual census records, but it's actually privacy protected records that have been processed through our protection system. And then we're fortunate that the folks at IPUMS and HGIS convert those for us into tables that data users would recognize and makes it easier for them to work with. One important piece of research that I have not previously mentioned in past presentations is a report that was published on September 4th. This report takes several Section 5 voting rights cases and 25 runs of our disclosure avoidance system and uses that to simulate these redistricting plans for the purpose of evaluating the variability of the underlying data coming out of the differential privacy application. This was done using the same version of the disclosure avoidance system that was used to produce that very first October 2019 demonstration data product. There are plans to update this simulation with more current data, and I'll mention that when I get to the current future plans. We did publish a new PPMF on September 17th that showed not only our progress to date, but also the fact that we had changed our focus to focus solely on our redistricting data set. There was an error found in that version, and we put some user notes on the website for folks who had already grabbed that so they could understand what that error means. But I am also happy to say that the error that was in the September 17th publication was corrected, and we republished a similar PPMF in November. There were some additional enhancements that occurred at that time, but they were mostly things like hardening of the code to a production code base, so more like back-end activity, back-end cleanup. This PPMF was also converted to tables, and it's also available on the same link from the previous slide for the IPUMS and HGIS group that has been doing that work for us. Our most current activity as far as differential privacy has been the official setting of the invariant parameters for the 2020 Group 1 products. Group 1 products is sort of a new term for this decade because of how we're organizing things as we go through the differential privacy mechanism. And so for those of you who aren't aware of what's included in that, it's the PL 94-171 redistricting data, it's the demographic profiles that come out right after the redistricting data, the demographic housing and characteristic file, which is not an exact match to what used to be called Summary File 1, but it's a new version of Summary File 1 with a few changes and tweaks. And then the Congressional District Summary File, which is the data product that we produce after collecting the new congressional districts from the states, where we retabulate the demographic housing and characteristic file to those new boundaries and a few other geographies that they intersect. And if you're not familiar with our terminology of invariant, it's essentially a number that is reported unchanged from our internal enumerated value. For the 2000 and 2010 census, the redistricting data was published with the total population and the total voting age population as invariants, all the way down to the individual census block. The characteristics may have been swapped or modified, but those two numbers were the equivalent to the internal enumerated value, that total and that total voting age. However, with the identified risks that make differential privacy essential to protecting respondent data, a decision was made that those could no longer be reported unprotected. Removing that constraint does not mean a value won't be the same, it just means that it's not guaranteed to be the same. So the invariants that have been set for the 2020 census group 1 products are the total population, but at the state level, the total housing unit count at the individual census block level, and the number of group quarters facilities by type at the census block level. So this is not the one for the group quarters. I want to just be clear. This is not talking about the population in the group quarters. This is talking about the number of actual group quarters by their type will be held invariant at the block level. And I have a little more clarity on that on a future slide if people are curious as to what group quarters facilities are and what their types are. So now what comes next? In December, the disclosure avoidance team will conduct experimental runs of the system to help evaluate and tune it. The experiments will examine how various allocations of the privacy loss budget by geographic level and by query set would impact accuracy and fitness used for the data. From these experiments, we'll produce a new set of metrics to allow our users to assess the improvements made during the test. This set of metrics will not have a PPMF released. And this is due to the time constraints on the people and resources that are needed to do this work and publish a new PPMF during this time frame. But next, in early 2021, the census body that's responsible for making decisions about differential privacy parameters, our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, will determine the final privacy loss budget for the 2020 census and its allocation toward the different data products, including the redistricting data. After that is set, we'll produce one final PPMF and set of detailed summary metrics using the production parameters that will be used for the 2020 PL 94-171 redistricting data summary file. That's the redistricting data. So essentially, we will use the production code base to regenerate a PPMF from the 2010 data that is also the same software that will be used on the 2020 data. So you'll get a really strong view of what the 2010 data would have looked like using what we're going to do for 2020. So when exactly the redistricting data will be released is still a work in progress. It's been mentioned publicly by the Bureau that in order to deliver apportionment counts as soon as possible, we had to decouple some activities that would have happened together, but were needed for redistricting and not apportionment. That's what I was mentioning earlier and when we were talking about some of the efficiencies to be able to compress the apportionment schedule. We will be working to provide the redistricting tabulations as close to their statutory deadline as possible, but while assuring the data is of the quality that's expected from the Census Bureau and is needed for the type of work that it's used for. But I am happy to say that we do finally have solid dates for when states and the public can expect the geographic support materials that precede the PL tabulations. These products will be provided to the states as they clear our quality control process. We expect to begin delivering the first sets of states by the 22nd of January and finish delivering the last state's geography no later than February 28th of 2021. For folks who are still preparing, we do still have the prototype data products available, and the link to them is also on this slide up under the prototype data part of the calendar. And as soon as we have dates and timelines for the final tabulation release, we'll make sure that we communicate that wide and far through NCSL to our official stakeholders and to the public. So this is just going to be a quick reminder of what's going to be coming in January and February. We have the 4 primary geographic products, the shapefiles for use in a geographic information system, the paper maps that will be delivered electronically as PDFs that people can print out on paper plotters, the block assignment files, the block-to-block relationship files, which is the crosswalk between the 2010 and the 2020 blocks, which may be helpful due to the reduced number of blocks we'll have this decade. And then, of course, the data itself. We'll have the race table, the race for the population 18 and over, the Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race, and then the same for the population 18 and over, the housing unit by occupied and vacant status table, and then this group quarters population by group quarters type. All of these tables will be available at the individual census block level. And as I mentioned before about group quarters types, what's being held invariant is these types and the number of these group quarters in a block will be held invariant. So things like correctional institutes for adults, nursing homes, college university student housing, military quarters, those types of things will will not change when we process the data. And finally, I just wanted to revisit the Citizen Voting Age by Race and Ethnicity, or CVAP product. The annual American Community Survey-based CVAP tabulation has often been used when analyzing redistricting plans. And we've been producing this data set from the ACS every year since 2011. And I can confirm that we will publish this annual special tab from the ACS in early February. The smallest unit of geography in this will be block group. It'll be the 2010 block groups because it's coming from that ACS 5-year estimates that's being released next week. And that data set uses the 2010 statistical geography. And then the other CVAP that you've heard about this decade, or for this decennial, the one based on the 2020 census and using administrative records for the citizenship characteristics, the schedule for that is still under development because much like redistricting is hooked to the end of apportionment, the CVAP from administrative records needs the redistricting data schedule to be able to start working on their production timeline. So they're sort of in the same boat we are with redistricting, waiting for a few of those inputs. This other CVAP will be published at the block level using 2020 geography, so it will nest nicely within all of the other 2020 geographies that are planned from the decennial census. With that, I would just say thank you. And I don't know if Wendy, if you wanted to do any questions first, or if we go right to Karin.
Well, the first thing I want to do is say that it always amazes me how many products the census produces. Our group tends to think about two, your reapportionment data and your PL 94-171. Those of us who are more advanced remember that there's some geographic information that comes before that. But you've shared with us many, I bet you've mentioned 24 different products that are coming out from the Bureau. So that's a lot of productivity we're seeing there. Yeah. There's one question from, Adeline mentioned that maybe the reason the housing units are held invariant is because they were released some time ago. Could you just address that real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Karin.
I don't know if that's the sole reason. I mean, the number of housing units is an indicator that is used in our count question resolution project. When people appeal, if they feel that there's an issue with coverage errors or boundary errors in their data, they also need to know the number of housing units to be able to make that appeal. I think because we, in some of our interactive update programs that we did, we released the number of housing units. So that may be part of what they're talking about from Mike Ratcliffe and then the New Mexico Data Users Conference. I don't have a solid answer for that, but I know that those are two of the considerations.
All right, and I am going to ask Hansi's question while you're still with us, because I think it might be super easy, and that is, do you know if you're going to be doing a rolling release on the state data, or will it be all at once, which was what we'd heard the last time? It was likely to be all at once.
I still am, the plan that I'm going to put forward to census executives for approval as soon as we lock down the last two unknowns that we have to do to finish that schedule, we'll have the single national release of data. And then it'll be up to them to either approve that plan, or we will have to readjust that plan.
Great, thank you very much, James. And I hope you can hang on with us for questions that might come at the end. Karin, I want to turn to you and say that I know that your assignment was to respond to James, but I think you can do more than just respond. So would you take it away, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, I had two assignments. My first assignment was to put a PowerPoint together, and then I had another one that talked about responding to James. So by that point, I already had my PowerPoint, and so I might as well share it with you. I would like to caveat this presentation by saying that this is going to be less technical. This is a user's perspective. And I thought I might break down some of the terminology that James has been talking about, and I'll go through some of the things that James was saying. So just 1 second, please, while I share my screen. Okay. So anticipating the 2020 census data, I was struggling a little bit with the title for this talk. I initially wanted to call it Things That Keep Me Up at Night. And here they are. I'd like to talk about 4 things. Just in general, they are data quality issues with census, disclosure avoidance system. When can we finally get started? Because that is something that everybody is wondering. And then talk about other data. So this is going to be pretty quick. From a user perspective, why are we concerned about data quality? Let's remember what happened in this census. I mean, we all know that census is already an incredibly difficult undertaking. It requires a lot of hands on deck, a lot of planning for many, many years. And of course, this time we had our first online census. One of the concerns that many states had were related to the fact that 6% of the overall population, according to the FCC, lacks broadband access. And in rural areas, that is more pronounced. So that is 25%. We also know that there are differences in internet access for minority populations and so forth. So there was a concern that was translated by many or responded to by many states, in particular California, I would say, by putting a lot of outreach funds into census data collection to make sure that we would get a good count. There were also concerns about things like unsecured computers, potential hacking, phishing, and so forth, the kind of stuff that just happens or could happen potentially when lots of people are accessing a particular site, and there are lots of people sitting out there that would like to take advantage of that. Then we had COVID, of course, that threw a wrench into all of the operations. And then moving on, there were various issues reported that had to do with data collection and data assignments that were pushed to enumerators via apps. We saw a lot of this in the media. If you're looking for reports from actual enumerators and so forth, this has also translated in some of the lawsuits already. And then there are questions about, for example, student populations that are on the move and duplications and how the Census Bureau would deal with duplications. Just remember that Census Day is April 1 of the year ending with 0. And if you're looking at the timeline of COVID and the fact that a lot of students were in student housing at that point and then had to move out, many moved back to their parents. There was a lot of confusion about where the census forms should be filled out. People that deal with student populations can talk about this for days, about how universities are not giving complete data sets to census to be able to aid in the deduplication efforts and so forth. So there are definitely some concerns about just that whole issue of data collection and so forth. And then we also know that there were fewer non-response follow-up visits. And some of that had to do with COVID. There were a lot of locked apartment buildings. People really didn't want to open the door. And, in some areas, this is easier to deal with than in other areas. So we have kind of a differential issue there with respect to data collection. Then we also had changing and abbreviated timelines. And I know I'm taking a trip down memory lane with all of you, but we first had an extension in the data collection and processing timelines, and then that was undone. So overall, there was really significantly less time for data processing. And let's all remember that there are significantly more people in the US that had to be counted for this census than there were in 2010. So add to that significantly less time for data processing, and looking at the planned data processing schedule pre-pandemic, which was 5 months, then the Census Bureau requests due to COVID, making that 6 months, and then the actual time allotted being less than 3 months, that most certainly can give you some nightmares. According to the Commerce Department Inspector General, the streamlined data processing under the accelerated census plan poses a myriad of risks to accuracy and completeness. And this is, of course, what we're all worried about. So let's talk about disclosure avoidance and differential privacy. It might be good to just kind of go through this terminology a little bit, because I think at this point, there's an assumption that everybody really has internalized what that all means. I'm not sure that that's true. I have to remind myself always what that means. So I thought it might be helpful to have this slide. And there are some experts on this call, so I'm hoping I'm getting this right. So what is a disclosure avoidance system? They're basically methodologies and techniques that are applied to collected data to protect the respondent's privacy. And it's also referred to as privacy protection systems. What is differential privacy? So that is the new methodology that is implemented, that is being implemented now by the Census Bureau. It's part of the new disclosure avoidance system. And in other words, when we talk about noise that is injected into the collected data, that is essentially what differential privacy is. What noise does, it is makes data less accurate. So it juggles data around a little bit, and it does that to protect privacy. Then there's another term that is good to know, and that is post-processing. So what is post-processing? That is a statistical process that corrects some of the counts by geography. So that happens after you apply the differential privacy noise. And what it does is it eliminates negative values. So some of the blocks after you, after the census, I should say, after the census applies differential privacy may have negative values. So there's -5 people living in it. And then post-processing would look at those blocks and they basically correct it. So in sum, very simplistically, differential privacy plus post-processing gives us the disclosure avoidance system, or DAS. So what is the problem, or how big is the problem? And I've seen some of my colleagues, in particular Kim and some others, and Jeff already post some of these issues that I'm talking about here in the chat. And it's basically, how do we know how big the problem is? The problem in general is that the new disclosure avoidance system is still a work in progress. And I appreciate all of the stuff that Census is doing right now. I really appreciate, and I think we all do, the incredible collaboration and James's work, and the willingness to put data sets out there for general consumption and for people to evaluate. But I think the proof's also in the pudding that this is a work in progress, and perhaps that Census could benefit from a little bit more time to iron out some of the issues that are happening. To remind you, Census released 4 data sets for evaluation and made changes after feedback was received from the research community. And those data sets, they took 2010 census data and applied the new privacy measures. So that is what we could compare. The data sets are referred to as DPs 1 through 4, so demonstration product 1 through 4. If you see that, that is what those are. They were released starting in October 2019. There were some really great maps made by Caliber Corporation that are still on their website. So if you look at, I think you can Google Caliber Corporation differential privacy maps, and they pop up and they illustrate what happened in this first release. So I'll give you some of the quick talking points. The findings were that there was a bias in there that moved total population from the urban to the rural areas. The effect was less in the urban areas, but pretty significant in the rural areas. It distributed also minority populations from high concentration urban areas to low concentration rural areas. And with this assessment, I am benefiting from analyses that have been done by many of my colleagues, and I just want to do a particular shout out to Stephen Ochoa from MALDEF, who's done an incredible amount of work on these data sets and has shared findings with many of us. So differential privacy demonstration product 2, demonstration product 2 was released in July 2020. And that one was better in total population distribution, but it was still very similar to the release 1 in minority distribution. Demonstration product 3 release was in September 2020, and that had, as James said, an error in the data set in that it held 0 population blocks invariant. And the plan was only to keep state population invariant, but what it basically did is it took the 0 population blocks and held them constant so that through differential privacy, other data could not be sprinkled to those blocks. And that was an interesting data set actually to evaluate. It also made high concentration minority areas more minority and lower concentration minority areas less minority. And then a differential privacy 4, demonstration product 4 release November 2020. There wasn't a lot of time to evaluate this yet. It appears to do better on total population, but it again increases minorities in high concentration minority areas, and it decreases minorities in lower minority population areas. And that is similar to release 3. So in all releases, in summary, the smaller the geography, the larger the changes in total population. And this may really have significant effects on redistricting of small jurisdictions. I know we're generally talking about, legislative seats and all that, but city councils and so forth are definitely going to see an effect if this continues. So the new disclosure avoidance system definitely has certain biases that are being worked out. The question is, can they be fixed in time, and how will we know? As James said, in the interest of time, they're not going to put out another demonstration data set. So that's a big question. And the census, again, will not release another test data set. The new disclosure avoidance system will be applied to the new PL94 and other products, and we will not have anything to compare the methodology to. So we can't really compare to the 2010, obviously, because now we're looking at newly collected data. So we don't really know whether there's a problem or how big of a problem there may be. And that, combined with all of the other issues that I've just outlined in terms of data collection, most certainly gives me pause and concerns me. So on the brighter note, what do we know? We do know that the PL94 will be released between March 31st and July 31st. So we will have a data set at some point in those months. And there are some things that you can do before these data are released. For example, if your state needs to reallocate prisoners to their last known residential address, you could start collecting those data sets and clean those data sets. And I will tell you from experience, cleaning of that data set, California has to do it, is a lot of work. So get started on this if you haven't already. If you don't have election and voter registration data already, but you will need it, start to collect it. You can set up hearing schedules, websites, draft informational materials, do translations and accessibility tools, get everything ready. This can all be done on the front end. Oftentimes these things kind of get done when the data are already released, but many of these things can be done on the front end. And one very important thing is figure out how to conduct hearings during COVID. I think that's going to keep all of us busy. Start hearings to collect public input. That's also possible before the data are released. And then if communities of interest are a criterion in your state, you can start to collect those also. Also remember, you will have the geography already available, and that is definitely going to be a big plus once the geography is out in February latest. If you have a commission, you can start trainings. You can start the trainings for the commission. There's usually a lot of bureaucracy there that needs to happen before people are brought up to speed. You can hire staff and contractors and so forth. And then, as James said, utilize the citizen voting age population special tabulation. We were able to get the census with James's help to release that one more time. They were not going to do that. Thank you very much for everybody's help, Kim in particular, and James. This will be released in February, and you could potentially start with some preliminary voting rights assessments. So takeaways really quickly, the census is not over. Everybody needs to stay informed and involved and ask questions about data accuracy. Support census staff and census operation by requesting that they be given sufficient time to produce the best possible data. And the delays in the census data release do not mean that you cannot get started with your redistricting activities, prepare other data sets, collect supplemental data, and utilize the CVAP data set if you want to do some preliminary VRA assessments. And stay safe and happy redistricting. Thank you very much.
Karin, thank you very much. For those of you who are new to redistricting, Karin and James just did a very fine job of trying to make a dense topic available to all of us. So I really appreciate sort of the thought that went into making this information available. And I know that James and Karin would both be happy to talk to people offline as well. So you can get their emails from us. I'm seeing the nodding heads that yes, they're willing to do that. We have a few questions. One is sort of a legal question, and it's addressed to you, James, but I think James or Karin could answer it. And then I'm going to come back to the more technical questions. And that came from Benjamin. He's asking, what are your thoughts on New Jersey's recently passed constitutional amendment to delay redistricting if data isn't received by February 15th? Do either of you have an opinion or something to offer? My own thought on that was that they had good forethought in giving themselves some flexibility. How about you two?
So this is James, and I wouldn't comment on whether it was a good or bad thing, but I do think that it's going to make things easier for them, because we were not going to be able to get them the data within that time frame. So if that's when they felt that they needed to have the data in their hands to be able to do the work that they need to do with the plans this decade, even before our COVID delays, we wouldn't have been able to get them the data by that time frame. So if that's what they felt they needed, then that's it should work well for them. Right.
And now let's move on to some of the more technical questions. And this one came in while you were talking, Karin, and that was, can you explain why differential privacy has less impact in urban areas, but also distributes minority population from high concentration areas, which tend to be urban, to lower? Can you do that again? And if it makes more sense for James to field that, I'm sure that's fine too.
I don't know that I can explain it quickly. I think that there is another seminar coming up in January where Wendy and Christy promised that we would have more time to explain things. And I think we should focus on explaining it there and perhaps kind of illustrating it a little bit. So James, if you think you have a quick way of explaining that, please go ahead.
I would say with differential privacy, it's a steep learning curve, and there is no real quick way for any of the explanations. But I think your suggestion might be a good one.
Well, and that was such a nice segue, Karin. I thank you for mentioning we do have a redistricting seminar January 6th to the 8th. It is online, and we'll put the registration in the chat box. Our intended audience are legislators and legislative staff, but everyone is welcome to participate with that. James, if you can do invariance for housing units and group quarters at the block level, why not also for total population? That comes from Kim.
So,
no, that's a hard
Kim.
one, isn't it?
Yeah, so, you know, we did discuss it and we looked at it, and holding the total population invariant for the population would affect other things about population. So housing units don't necessarily affect the population characteristics, but if we were to hold the total population and the total voting age population invariant at the block level, as we've done in the past, then the noise that goes into the data to help protect the respondent's privacy would have to be distributed elsewhere. And the only elsewhere there when it comes to the person records is the race and ethnicity characteristics. So the decision was made that it would be better overall for the purposes of redistricting to try to not have that effect and relax that that requirement.
Great, thank you. And then Mickey asks, and this is probably for you, James, but either, any recommendations on best ways for localities to involve community groups to understand communities of interest? And Karin, you've done a lot of that kind of stuff. Maybe we will start with you. How do you involve the local people in identifying what are communities of interest?
I'm going to make a suggestion that we start a user group that starts communicating on that question. And also Raisa, if I am pronouncing your name properly, asked about recommendations about conducting redistricting public hearings during COVID. I think everybody is going to be grappling with this. This is going to be one of the top issues, I think, that redistricting bodies have to deal with. And I think it would be good to get a group together that perhaps meets, and maybe NCSL can set that up, and talks about best practices. There have definitely been some developed already, and I'm happy to share what California has done. I would say look at your census outreach and start piggybacking onto that. That would be my very quick, very broad answer. but there's a lot of detail after that. There's also apps out there that can be used and so forth. So Wendy, let me make that suggestion, and maybe we can throw it out to everybody and see if there might be an interest. I would love to participate in that.
Well, I hear you loud and clear, because we've been sort of saying public input, public input. We don't quite have that landed yet. And maybe the first way to land it is to find out what's going on in the states. And that would be by bringing people together. If any of you have an idea, or just give us what you got right there in the chat box today, please, on things that are working in your state. And Chris asks something about when is the final date that we could possibly get that data. And Karin, you said it would be July 31st, but I didn't hear you say that, James. When could it be?
Yeah, so I am empathize with Chris's question and Michael Chernick's follow-up question. I am also frustrated with not being able to provide more concrete information about the timeline for when you'll receive that data. We are the processing and the creation of different data products from the Census Bureau follows a chain of activities, and there are preceding activities going on right now in order to create the apportionment counts that have to the final date for when certain outputs from the apportionment production line are available, are needed, so that we can hook the redistricting activities to that final date, because that has the inputs that we need. We've made a lot of progress on identifying the subsequent activities that we'll have to do to sort of put Humpty Dumpty back together again, since we've decoupled things that we would have already done by that point. So we know what we have to do there. We know the sequencing of activities. There's one or two little pieces of uncertainty that we have to get ironed out. And then we actually have to propose that plan before we can start making timeline adjustments. But I'm hoping that by this time next month, we will at least be able to start giving you a narrowed down window of the time frame when we expect to be able to give you that data, if not the exact dates. Since we're going to be doing a national release, eventually we should be able to provide everyone a date or a couple of days from which that data will come out. So if you just hold on with me for about another month, we should be able to start getting some concrete information.
I've been trying to work for most of this year on new words to replace uncertainty and unprecedented and such, and we are just in that world of uncertainty and unprecedented everything. So I do need to close us out promptly. So I want to thank James and Karin very much for sharing with us and for making yourselves available to talk with anyone who's on this call separately. And the message we got about public input, it's stored, it's going to go forward. I promise we hear you, and we will do that, because we know that's one of the things that states can be doing right this very minute. So with that, stay safe and stay in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.